And those against? And any abstentions? No, thank you. Declarations of interest? None. Public question time. We haven't received any public questions. Is there any public questions? But they cannot be about this or anything relating to this planning committee. No. One last chance. No. Thank you. To item 4, report of the strategic manager for planning and infrastructure in relation to 20-005134 land to the northeast of New Barn Business Park, Sandown Road, which is in the parish of Arreton and the Central Rural Ward. This is the construction, operation and decommissioning of a well for the exploration and appraisal of hydrocarbon minerals from one exploratory borehole, Arreton 3, and one sidetrack borehole, Arreton 3Z, for a temporary period of 3 years involving the siting of plant and equipment, the construction of a new access track, a new junction with a new port to Sandown Highway A3056, the erection of boundary fencing, entrance gates, and other ancillary development with restoration to agriculture, provide plans and information relating to means of access and rights of way, mitigation measures, site layout, sections and restoration, clarification relating to ecology and environmental health issues, revised location plan, red line boundary. This is a re-advertised application. I will now call on Mr. Russell to, sorry, Mr. Chick, to present. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Good evening, members. Just to remind members before I go into the presentation that there has been an update paper circulated today, and that you should just have regard to that. An update paper includes 6 additional representations that have been made since the publication of the report. There's also been a petition received by the Council on October 12th, which is quoted verbatim within the update paper. And there is also just reference to a slight typographical error in the officer report, where it refers to national planning policy statements for energy, whereas they should be national policy statements for energy. So moving on to the presentation for the proposed development then. Councillors, you remember going on site on Friday. The application site is shown on the red square there. I'm just going to turn on the laser pen. There we go, that's a bit easier. So the red dot is just hovering around the location of the application site here. It's located 3.8 kilometres southeast of Newport, about 1 kilometre north of Merston, and 300 metres north of the A3056 Newport Sandown Highway. So just moving into the actual application site boundary is shown by the red line. The red line area here extends to around 1.4 hectares, and that covers the area of the proposed compound. And then there is the proposed access route, which is hugging the side of the right-of-way there, and that area amounts to about 0.5 hectares, about half a hectare. So a quick aerial shot of the application site. The application site is in this location here, and what you can see in this aerial slide is the location of the nearby mineral site at the point of the red dot at the moment. Then the existing AD power station to the east, and also the solar farm off to the southwest. The village of Arreton is just at the point of the cursor now on the right-hand side of the slide. That's the nearest conservation area to the application site. I'm just going to pop back to the OS plan for a couple of things I should have said. So councillors will have seen the assessment in the report about listed buildings, and I thought I'd just highlight them now. Stone Farm, a listed building here, listed farmhouse and barn, off to the west of the site near Blackwater. Merston Manor is located to the south of the site here. The distances are all in the report. And then obviously the Arreton Conservation Area, the listed St George's Church, Arreton Manor and Arreton Farmhouse, which councillors visited on Friday. In addition to that, the Bembridge Trail runs along the summit of St George's Down at the point of the red dot here. Just moving on, this is a LiDAR image of the application site, which I thought might just be helpful just to show the topography of St George's Down here. So you can just see the shadowing there. That is showing the height of that down. It's about 100 metres above sea level. The application site's about 65 metres above sea level. Then moving on to the designations that relate to the site then. The area shown in yellow here is the extent of the AONB designation. This map doesn't show the southern section of the AONB designation because it's too far away, but it is around Chillerton and Ramsdown in that area there. Then moving on to the orange hatching, that shows sites of importance for nature conservation, so sinks. And then the pink hatching here is the conservation area that I referred to. Just out of interest, the line around Arreton there is the settlement boundary for the Rural Service Centre. And then on the southern part of this slide, you can see the River Medina there and the flood zones that surround it. So just some quick photographs of the application site. These photographs are taken in around the application site from the right of way. So the photograph you see here is a photograph looking from the northern part of the site down towards footpath A29, which at that point is tunnelled. Councillors will remember standing at the entrance to that tunnel, which then traverses up the down towards the AONB. Then the slide in the bottom right-hand corner is taken just above footpath A29, just north of the main road, and that farm track there is the site of a proposed alternative footpath route, which I'll show you on a plan in a moment. And then the photograph in the top of the slide at the point of the red dot now is the view out of the site towards the quarry and the asphalt plant there, which are well-established elements of the landscape. Moving on to some photographs of the site itself, then these are taken at the northern edge of the field within which the site is located. We didn't walk up onto it on Friday, it's a very steep walk, but these photographs are just showing what can be seen when you're stood on top of that area there, looking out over the application site, which is here in this depression within that small valley, then looking off towards the east, towards Rookley and Godshill and the downs around Worsley there, and then looking off, slightly off to the west, towards, I suppose, Gapcombe in that area here. Thought it might be just worth outlining the stages of hydrocarbon development. They are outlined within the Officer report, but I thought it might be useful just to outline those. There's 3 stages: exploration, appraisal and production. And the exploratory phase seeks to acquire information to show whether there are hydrocarbons present at all. Then the appraisal stage is the next stage, which looks at if there is an existence of oil or gas, hydrocarbons at that site. Then the operator seeks to find further information about the extent of that deposit, its production characteristics, and whether it can be economically exploited. And then the next stage is production. This application doesn't propose that at all. Those 3 stages all need planning permission. They can be applied for separately or together. And then obviously the next stage is decommissioning and restoration. Thought it would also be useful to outline the regulatory roadmap relating to hydrocarbon development. So, as in the case of this site, the Oil and Gas Authority are in charge, if you like, of awarding licenses for areas where oil deposits may be. They're called pedal licenses, and it's the OGA that issue those. After that, then the prospective applicant has to apply for a range of permissions, one of those including planning permission, obviously, but also there are various other consents and other issues that are controlled by other agencies, the Environment Agency, and all of those other regulatory services are consultees for the planning application. The agency also has its permit processes, which are outlined here on the slides. The Health and Safety Executive also control the well, and the OGA also look at the competency of the applicant. And once all those are consented, the OGA can issue a drilling consent. And then just a quick slide to show exactly what all those agencies control. So Health and Safety Executive, this is all outlined in the report, control well integrity, staff safety, well design and construction scrutiny, and the decommissioning of the wells. The Environment Agency, amongst other things, look at the impact on aquifers, water usage, soil pollution, the use of chemicals on the site, how they're stored, how they are controlled, how they are moved. As I said, the Oil and Gas Authority look at the licensing process, operator competence, and then, the Minerals Planning Authority is looking at the land use aspects of the proposals and therefore looking at issues such as traffic, local air quality, impact on neighbouring properties, wildlife ecology, and site restoration and aftercare. Moving on to the policy guidance that's relevant to this planning application then. The island plan is the development plan for the Isle of Wight currently. It outlines what is acceptable and what is not on the island and what developments are expected to do and to comply with. The island plan does have minerals guidance, but it doesn't have specific minerals guidance for hydrocarbons. And as councillors will know, where a local development plan is silent on a particular issue, the planning authority's default position is to then consider what the National Planning Policy Framework says about that particular issue. The National Planning Policy Framework in this case does have guidance about hydrocarbon development and indeed minerals as well. It advises planning authorities to give great weight to the benefits of minerals development, particularly the benefits to the economy. In addition to that, the National Planning Policy Guidance, the government's guidance on how policy should be interpreted and applied, also advises that the national policy statements for energy should also be taken into account for developments of this nature. And councillors, you'll have read the sections of the report that consider policy EN1, which is shown now on the left-hand side, the blue picture, but it also considers the more recent policy guidance or intentions for policy guidance that government has released over the last couple of years or so. So the government's white paper, Powering Our Net Zero Future, outlines the roadmap really for energy supplies up until 2050. There is also the UK's Integrated National Energy and Climate Plan and the government's 10-point plan for a green industrial revolution. And of course, they're all underpinned by the requirement for net zero by 2050, which is set out within the Climate Change Act. The Isle of Wight Council published its own climate and environment strategy in September. It is a material consideration for this planning application. As I say, it's adopted in 2021. It sets targets for the council to achieve net zero by 2030 and for the whole island to achieve net zero by 2040. The target, the strategy outlines that the target will include up to 15% carbon offset, including local planting and marine schemes, with credit purchases seen as a last resort. So credit purchases are a bought offset mechanism where to sort of balance out carbon consumption and usage, credits are bought elsewhere, but that is seen as a last resort. It also includes an action plan that provides details of the actions and objectives to meet net zero targets, quite a detailed action plan, and a pathway of actions for various sectors on the island in order to achieve targets. And it states that it would disincentivize oil or mineral exploration and extraction while ensuring sustainable extraction where it's necessary. As councillors will know, the Isle of Wight is also a biosphere. Gained that status some years ago. They are stated to be learning places for sustainable development, looking at interdisciplinary approaches to understanding and managing changes in interactions between social and ecological systems. So basically looking how we, when we go about our daily business, and the council as well, interrelate with the environment on the island. And the island is recognised as an example of where local communities have found a way to live sustainably with their local ecosystems. And that's why the island has that accreditation. So moving into the actual plans then for the application. As the chairman said, the proposal is to drill a well, which will include a main well and a sidetrack well, and I've got some images of that in a moment. Related to that is the necessary infrastructure which will be contained within this proposed compound. It would measure a total of 73 metres in length and 47 metres in depth. It would be excavated to be level with the lowest point of the site, which is 65 metres above sea level. Any earth that would be excavated to form that area would be stored in bunds around the edge of the site. So these green marks around the edge of the site are the bunds that would surround the application, the compound. The grey area is the well compound, and the white area next to it is the area where security staff would be based, and also the parking spaces for the staff who would be working on site, so 20 parking spaces. Probably can't see it too clearly on this slide, but around the edge of the compound would be a drain that would be dug. The compound itself would be underlain by an impermeable membrane, and the aim of the design for the drainage and that membrane would be to create a sealed unit effectively in that area that would contain any surface water. It would be collected within the drain or within the site itself. It would be stored in tanks and then tankered off of the site. Then you'll see here where the proposed site access would cross the right-of-way here. As explained on site on Friday, that would be a gated access point, and sort of modus operandi of that would be for the gates to be closed to the actual well site and the access at most times. So when the access isn't in use, those gates would be closed, and that would allow free flow of the right-of-way there for anyone walking or cycling or on a horse to go through there. And that area would be manned at all times, and the priority would be for people using that right-of-way. So if a vehicle is coming up the track and needs to cross, if there's someone already using the right-of-way, they would have priority over those vehicles. Moving on to the proposed access then, the main section of it, as you saw it in the other slide, this is about where that slide cuts off. A 400-metre access track would be formed down the side of footpath, right away A29. In addition to that, there would be an alternative right-of-way formed for the period of the development in this location, just off to the east of that right-of-way on the higher ground that I showed in the photograph earlier on, and the councillors saw on site on Friday. The actual junction here would be located to the west of the crossing point here of the bridleway. It crosses the main road, come down here off St George's Down. Off to the south is Merston Manor, and then you're on to the Island Cycleway and right-of-way network that runs through the Medina Valley there. So the proposed access would just snake around this area here. This area would be used to store earth that would be excavated to form the access. There would be a gate set about 30 metres back from the junction of the road. That would allow larger vehicles to pull in and wait without blocking the highway. And then just this location here would be slightly wider than the rest of the access, and the purpose of that is so that vehicles can pass here. It's effectively a holding area. The access would have a banksman, as would at the top of the site, who would tell one another when vehicles are coming in or out. And so if vehicles need to pass, they can do so in this location here. And there would be a site security hut at the entrance there. The application site would be enclosed by mesh fencing, 2 metres high, up the side of the proposed access as well as the compound. In the location of the right-of-way, it's proposed that that mesh is fitted with some sort of screening system. That would be agreed by conditions with the planning authority with the input of the rights-of-way officer. And the purpose of that is to screen the site for the people walking past, but mainly for horses that are passing the site, to prevent them from being spooked by any quick movements within that site. Just a quick topographical image then, just showing how the application site would look when excavated. So this would be the level compound here with the membrane underneath it. The bunded areas would be located here and here. They would wrap around the back of the site, but the front of the site to the right of way would be open. And then this is just showing the profile of the site onto the right of way here. So the right of way is here. This would be the compound, and then you can see the back of the compound with the bunds and then the fencing located here. Moving swiftly on then, this image shows the drilling phase layout. So this phase would include the drilling of the main borehole, where the drilling rigs would be used. The equipment on site in this phase would include water tanks, generators, pipe store, mud and fuel tanks, office and accommodation facilities in this area here. It would take around 10 weeks to construct. The equipment that would need to be used within that area, and then that would be followed by the drilling period. The drilling needs to be a 24-hour operation, and the report sets out why, but basically it's to prevent coagulation, a situation where where the drill stops, the materials around it could become compacted and stop it from moving, which is the reason why it's a 24-hour process. And then moving on, just to show the purpose of the operation, which is to drill one main well with a sidetrack well. So the main well coming off down into this area here, and also a sidetrack well. So the drilling period would form that main well. It would extend up to 1.7 kilometres southeast of the site, but the final depth and trajectory would be finalised at a later stage with the relevant regulatory bodies. I'm just moving on to some very quick profiles of how the site would look if you stood next to it. So the elevation profiles showing the proposed rigs in location and the equipment that would surround them. So those rigs would be up to 37 or 38 metres high, and then the equipment in the compound wouldn't exceed 7 metres in height. Most of it would be around 3 to 4 metres in height, but some areas, particularly the area at the bottom of the rig, which is called the doghouse, would be up to 7 metres in height. And then just showing the proposed drilling reg options. So this is what's known as a BDF rig 51, which would be up to 38 metres in height. And then the second potential option would be a BDF rig 28, which would be up to 37 metres in height, and the final drilling rig would be chosen at a later stage. After that drilling phase would be what's called the initial flow testing stage, and this is showing a layout of that phase. It's very similar to the drilling phase, and during this phase there'd be initial short-term flow testing for a period of about 10 weeks, and that would confirm whether there were any hydrocarbon present on the site at all. And then this is just showing, again, like in the drilling phase, the potential elevations of how that would look, very similar equipment, and then a higher section of equipment here. And I've just shown some of the what are called workover rigs that would be used in that process. So this is what's called an Ideco BIR rig. And then moving on to a second option, which is called a more 475 workover rig, which would be up to 35 metres in height. After that initial testing mode would be what's called extended well testing, and this would take up to 16 weeks, and that's the period where, if hydrocarbons are shown to be present, this period aims to show the characteristics and the volume and the recoverability of the hydrocarbons. And then again, just some indicative sections of how that could look. So showing the profile of the site again with the equipment within it. Appreciate this, it's rather small on these screens. And then a crane shown now up to 36 metres in height. So the purpose of the crane and the workover rigs would be to lower tools into the well, and also the workover rig would be used to, if pumps need to be replaced or the drill hole needs to be cleansed at any point. And then the retention and layout, these are plans that show the retention phase. This would take place within the 3-year period of consent. So the proposals aren't to retain this compound anyway beyond 3-year proposals, but this would be if, say, the extended well testing is finished within a shorter period. This retention mode would be there for that period, just in case the applicant had to come back and find other scientific data for any reason. So once decommissioning takes place, the site would be restored, and as the report says, the site would be restored to its existing land levels using the soil that's stored as the various bunds around the site. It would remove all of the hard standings would be removed. The impermeable membrane would be cleaned and then dismantled and then removed and treated at a specialist site. I'm going to have to look at my slides for a minute because the pictures of the room are hiding what I've typed to say. Right, apologies for the delay. So yes, the land underlying the site would also be tested for contamination, and any material found to be contaminated would be removed from the site for treatment off-site at an EA-approved waste site. As I said, the stored topsoil would be used to reinstate development site to its previous land levels, and at that stage, the stored soil would be tested to establish any need for treatments for weeds or also any need to improve its condition. In addition to that, the scheme of hedge planting, tree planting and wildflower planting would be carried out to meet net gain requirements. What I should have said earlier on is that a section of hedgerow will be removed to form the site access. So as I explained on site on Friday, this section of hedgerow that we saw on site would be removed to form the access arrangements. That would be reinstated following the completion of the development. There would be an area of tree planting undertaken in this location here, off to the east of the public right of way. And there would be wildflower planting undertaken on the field margins and around hedgerows at the site to meet that net gain requirement. And this plan shows that in slightly more detail. Very hard to follow, obviously, on the screen, but it basically shows here the proposed tree planting, the proposed hedgerow planting and wildflower planting that would be undertaken in the areas around this section of the site and also on the headland up here. So the application, Chairman, is recommended for conditional permission, subject to the conditions within the officer report. The other thing I need to mention, almost forgot, was that a scheme of improvements to the right-of-way would be undertaken post-development. Those improvements would be negotiated with the right-of-way manager and the planning authority, but they would relate to the point that the right-of-way terminates at the main road here, the A3056, right up to the summit of St George's Down. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. If we go on to now the speakers, I will do them in order as we have. First one, Jonathan Idle. I do recognise, Jonathan, that you need to go early within that, so thank you for asking me. So do feel free when you need to go. You have now 2 minutes. Can you press your thing?
Thank you for allowing me to speak. We know about the climate emergency and about the international conference which the UK is about to host. Both of these make it vital that we don't start drilling for more oil. But I'll stick to the constraints of material considerations and show how you as members can do what is right within the material considerations. The discussion is about the benefits, the harm, and the mitigation. My point is about the benefits, the supposed economic benefits of a few jobs and some oil, and the point is that these are both negligible. A few people will be employed. The officer's report admits these are unlikely to be local people. The few temporary jobs that this would create would be for specialists from elsewhere, so few benefits there. The other supposed benefit is oil supply, not to the island, but for the nation. 2 points to refute that. One is that the amount that might be found would be tiny, 13 days worth of what the UK uses. And the amount that might be in the strata actually being tested is even less, 2 days' supply. The idea that this contributes to our national energy security is not of great weight, it is laughable. The second point on oil is that this application does not involve producing oil. If you stick to what is contained in the application, we cannot treat oil production as a benefit. The application is about building an operating hub for an industrial machinery. There is no economic benefit in exploration. In the same way as planning guidelines don't allow you to consider wider issues which make this such a terrible idea, and it is a terrible idea, those same guidelines can help you to turn it down by saying it produces no oil and very few local jobs. So the supposed economic benefit does not exist. Please reject the application.
Thank you. And now go to Mrs. Sylvia May. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Before a surgeon opens you up to perform surgery, you expect the practitioner will have professional competence, your detailed medical record, a full set of new data from scans, x-rays, blood tests, etc., and knows what hazards need mitigating to perform a successful operation. This is the same as drilling for fossil fuels. UCOG admits in their application that these are complex, hazardous industrial processes requiring up-to-date data sets, accurate hydrogeological mapping and strata mapping to mitigate hazards and confidently plan their technical operations. This is usually achieved by current methods of 2 or even 3-dimensional geological mapping and detailed seismic analysis. Given the admitted high risk to our water sources in this application, it is of particular importance. Yet UCOG has relied on outdated desk studies and not performed 2-dimensional seismic strata imaging at any time, despite this being a requirement of granting this license in 2015. In July 2020, a detailed report from eminent geophysicist Dr. David K. Smythe was submitted directly to the planning officer with 11 points for refusal. It highlights evidence that the fuel data sets used for analysis have been misinterpreted and are 23 years out of date, and that there are strata mapping inaccuracies, including missing fault lines. These matters suggest a lack of due diligence by the applicant and impacts their analysis of mitigation measures to reduce risk to our water sources from very high to very low. Worryingly, there has been no detailed rebuttal of the content and key concerns of his analysis by UCOG, and none of this appears in the officer's report. I would ask the committee to consider the implications of this in making your decision, and as a patient, I would not risk my life under the knife of this surgeon.
Now go to Mr. Stephen Davis. Thank you.
Thank you. As planning committee members, you will become used to applicants seeking to convince the committee that somehow their particular scheme isn't very damaging, or that it can be exempted from the guiding principles in the island plan of sustainability and environmental protection. Specialist consultants skilled in navigating the planning system will submit a barrage of documents, desktop studies, surveys, assessments and visualizations, all presented in a manner intended to soften the real-world impacts of the proposed activities. Fundamental considerations can become obscured by the sheer volume of material to be reviewed. You may encounter situations where your heart is telling you that something is wrong, but your head is telling you that you don't have the means to refuse it. Ladies and gentlemen, this is not one of those situations. The application is for an industrial activity that will damage everything it touches. A green field used for food production in a groundwater source protection zone will become an operating hub for heavy industrial equipment. There will be habitat destruction. There will be air pollution from the flaring of unwanted methane gas, the operation of site machinery, and the HGV movements needed to service the site. The release of 24,000 tonnes of CO2 equivalent greenhouse gases is predicted. A new road junction is required just below the brow of a hill on a busy cross-island route. All of this contributing to the degradation of the landscape. There are solid grounds for refusal on several points. The limited economic benefit derived from an exploration operation does not justify either the damage or the acceptance of the risks associated with these activities. Please refuse the application.
Thank you. Now come on to Councillor Martin Kimber from Arreton Parish Council.
Thank you.
You have 6 minutes, sir.
Arreton Parish Council strongly objects to this application for the many reasons set out in our objection letters. Today, I will focus on 5 areas of concern: transport, water and wastewater, the biodiversity net gain report, the future and other issues. Transport. We have concerns over the increase in traffic and the number of right-hand HGV turnings both into the site and also at Arreton Cross. Large HGV vehicles are slow to accelerate and will take some time to cross the carriageway. We have a concern that there are no proposed restrictions on non-HGV movements onto and off the site. The impact on ferries, the transport of heavy machinery would be via the ferry ports, and as the routes through Fishbourne are congested on a regular basis, any further increase would be unsustainable. It is unclear whether any of the waste is to be transported off the island by ferry. If it is, why has that not been included in the mitigation of risks? HGV movements are to be limited to normal working hours with no nighttime movement. However, this will include times of peak traffic, and this is unsatisfactory. Water and wastewater. There is no water supply borehole shown on this drawing, so where is the water coming from for the drilling process, the wheel wash, and watering the proposed trees? We are concerned that the site is in an SPZ3 groundwater special protection zone. If water is extracted locally, will it affect the aquifers further down the valley and have an adverse effect on the local agriculture and horticulture industries? The documentation is silent or unsatisfactory with respect to how the wastewater for the drilling process and the surface water will be disposed of, whether the water from the drainage channel alongside the access will be contaminated and where it will be discharged, the wheel wash, where will the dirty water go and is it likely to be contaminated? We are surprised that there do not appear to be any plans in place to deal with a potential spill of oil or other contaminant on the access road. The biodiversity net gain report. This was only provided in September with calculations posted on the planning portal. The calculated 44% net gain is based on proposals to plant trees, replace a hedge and fill gaps in existing hedges, create an undefined field margin, and create a buffer zone on the northern field boundary, although one already exists. However, we believe the figure of 44% is a gross overestimate. There are many other issues, notably the planting proposal represents a density of 20,000 trees per hectare, which is absurd. A skylark was identified in the Ecology Service, a red list species which needs open landscape away from trees. The planting proposal would discourage skylarks. In the future, if the track is to be removed, how will access be maintained to monitor the site and the groundwater monitoring boreholes and to water the new planting? We have concerns over the measures to bring the site back into agricultural production. It is stated that the area will be restored to chalk downland, but the area is actually sandstone. We are concerned over financial aspects, in particular the cost of returning the site to its original condition. It is understood that the cost could run into millions of pounds, potentially unaffordable by both UCOG and the landowner. We therefore think a bond must be stipulated to allow for this. Other issues. There are many factual errors in UCOG's documents, including the land on which the site is situated is grade 3 and not grade 4. The surrounding fields are at least grade 2. The original plan of the subsurface boreholes indicates an arc to the southeast, but Appendix 3 of the report refers to deviation to the southwest. Restoration was said to be chalk downland, but the area is sandstone. The Motkin hedgerow is not 260 kilometres from the site. The density of tree planting in the ecology report is ridiculous. Much is made of the fact that the topography and hedgerows hide the site, but moving the site entrance and creating the desired splay removes much of the hedgerow and diminishes the effect of topographical screening. This is currently an undeveloped agricultural site, and we are very concerned over light and air pollution from the works. In conclusion, Arreton Parish Council feels that the risks posed by this project vastly outweigh any potential benefits. We think the proposal is inconsistent with the Council's declared aim of achieving carbon neutrality by 2040. We believe that despite the greenwashing proposals in the ecology report, the project is likely to generate little or no environmental benefit. Finally, and most importantly, will this proposal benefit the island? Section 8.8 of Russell's report concludes, the proposed development will result in relatively minor economic benefits at the local level. Given these concerns and the serious risks associated with the proposal, we urge you to reject the application. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kimber. We now come on to the applicant, Mr. Matt Cartwright.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, members of the Planning Committee. I am the Commercial Director of UK Oil and Gas plc. I'd like to thank the planning officers for a balanced committee report and for their recommendation for conditional approval of our application. We've worked very hard with them to mitigate the temporary impacts of our proposed development. 75% of energy we use today for transport, manufacturing, and heating comes from oil and gas. Even in 2050, when we're at net zero, we still expect to be using 70% of the gas we do today and 20% of the oil. Currently, we import 36% of our energy, but the trend is increasing. By 2050, the shortfall in oil would add up to 1.9 billion barrels, costing the UK 110 billion pounds. This enormous energy deficit makes no economic sense when we've got the oil right under our feet. We estimate that in our success case, we could produce up to 18 million barrels from our Isle of Wight licence, retaining 1.3 billion pounds within the UK economy that would otherwise be lost overseas. Our proposed development is a necessary precursor to confirm commercial viability. Investment in the UK energy sector is currently 19 billion pounds a year, supporting 145,000 high-quality UK jobs. If Arraton were to become operational, it would lock in revenues for the UK, generate new lucrative jobs, create a new minerals sector for the island economy, which would attract further new investment to supply chain services. Furthermore, relying on imports makes no environmental sense. Oil production from places like Canada and Algeria generate 3 times the greenhouse gases of UK oil. If we can displace imports with indigenous oil, we can cut emissions by 64%, without even taking account of the emissions to transport that oil to the UK. We should not rely on oil imports that are dirtier than ours, more expensive than ours, and generate needless carbon emissions. The recent alarming energy price increases tell us that the UK's energy mix is fragile. Renewable technologies that we need in the coming years are still largely on the drawing board. This means a transition to a future low-carbon economy will have to be carefully managed if we're to meet long-term environmental standards and without damaging our economy and maintaining our living quality. Indigenous oil and gas is the bridge towards the renewables we need. In this transition, other countries are sourcing essential supplies closer to home. UK can do exactly the same. We can broaden our energy base and become more resilient when the next shock or the next price spike comes along. Making the most of our oil and gas resources is part of that solution. The initial investment involved in this application is around £6 million. We'll keep that expenditure within the island economy to the maximum extent possible. If successful, the level of follow-on direct investment at Arraton will be up to £30 million. Development is therefore potentially significant and beneficial to the island economy, but also for island businesses and jobs. It's more than that. Arraton will improve UK energy security, will reduce needless emissions from imports, and provide UK-wide investment.
Can I stop you there, please? Thank you. Thank you. We now have 3 minutes with Mr. Nigel Moore, who's the agent of the applicant. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, and members of the Planning Committee. My name is Nigel Moore. I'm a Chartered Town Planner and part of the Arraton Design Team. I'd like to thank officers for the report, which asks the 2 central questions for good land use planning. Is this the right site, and is this the right design? With regard to site selection, exploration can't be footless. It must follow the resource. Exploration in 1952 and again in 1974 confirmed the presence of a known reserve, and now in 2021, with the aid of directional drilling, we can access this site. We can access the site that is set back from the roadside, screened by undulating topography, and hard to decipher in a landscape that already plays host to the Blackwater Quarry and the White Farm anaerobic digester plant. The AONB partnerships say impacts will be minimal. The environmental health officer says residential amenity will be preserved, and planning officers find no conflict with the raft of local plan landscape and environmental policies. With regard to design, the Environment Agency and Island Roads do not object. The Rights of Way manager supports the substantial improvement of the local bridleway network. The Ecology Officer and Natural England support the 48% net biodiversity gain, the introduction of 40% more hedgerows, and new areas of meadow planting that will restore lost biodiversity and habitats. Planning officers find the site to be discreet with no visual access to any sensitive designation or tourist destination. They attribute great weight to the economic benefit of secure energy supplies, whilst recognising that the days of unmitigated oil and gas use are over. Come 2050, we will no longer use oil and gas to fuel our transport needs or heat our homes, but it will remain an essential raw material for the production of fertilizers, pharmaceuticals and medical supplies. It will remain an essential source of power for the heavy load industries where energy needs can't be easily renewabilised. And it will remain the energy backup we need to keep the lights on when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine. Members, Eriton is not about increasing our use of oil and gas. It's about ensuring the oil and gas we know that we'll need is within our control and can be recovered responsibly and sustainably. Eriton will make the island economy more resilient, it will broaden our national energy base, and it will help our government control the price of energy to meet the domestic needs of everyone in our society. Eriton is development in the UK general interest. It will deliver a public good that will benefit us all. Thank you, members.
Thank you. We now go on to the reward councillor. Councillor Susie Ellis is not well, and we send her all our best wishes. And Councillor Peter Spink is going to speak on her behalf and has her speech. So
that's correct, Chair.
6 minutes, Councillor Spink. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm sorry not to be at tonight's meeting due to illness, but I'm grateful for the opportunity to make this representation as the local member. I was elected on a pledge to stop damaging schemes such as this, and the number of objections to this application make it clear that islanders are against schemes that harm the appearance of the landscape, the environment, and ecotourism. Whereas here there are material planning considerations that justify a refusal, the committee should listen to the wishes of the electorate. I would like to thank officers for the comprehensive report that they have prepared for your consideration this evening. Whilst the application is recommended for permission, the report is also clear that the proposals raise marginal and competing policy issues. It is important to highlight this, and also the conclusion in paragraph 8.24, that the social and environmental impacts are considered by officers to be outweighed by the economic benefits. The weighing up of such negatives versus positives is a matter of judgment, and I believe the adverse impacts are greater than the purported benefits. Paragraph 7.69, these are paragraphs of the report. Paragraph 7.69 is clear that the various cranes and rigs would be imposing additions to the landscape and in quotation marks, causing material harm to the character of the area. Paragraph 7.71 sets out that the development would result in adverse impacts to the landscape to the east and southeast of the site. Paragraph 7.72 outlines that the development would, from the landscape close to Rookley and Blackwater Hollow, also in my ward, appear as an incongruous feature, industrial in nature and a harmful addition to a rural area. Paragraphs 7.79, 0.82 and 0.92 are clear that the development would, for road users, result in a high magnitude of change, resulting in significant harm owing to its industrial appearance within a rural setting. I draw these parts of the report to members' attention, as the applicant would have you believe that this harm is negligible. It is not. Furthermore, because it is a temporary development, there's not even the prospect of landscaping to mitigate, as paragraph 793 acknowledges, resulting in material harm arising. It is this material harm which I consider provides a sound policy basis for refusal, given that it demonstrably outweighs the limited economic benefits that would arise. A lot has been said in the report about existing national planning policies and the fact that these have not yet been amended to reflect the government's wider policy agenda. This may be the case, but we are still able to weigh up such matters in the overall planning balance. as paragraph 7.32 of the report is clear, the overarching effects of climate change should not be disregarded, before going on to say that the need for one, energy, and two, the objectives of achieving net zero are directly linked and must therefore be balanced in reaching a conclusion. There are clear policy-based reasons on which this application can be refused. The proposals are contrary to core strategy policies SP5, the environment, DM12, landscape, seascape, biodiversity and geodiversity, and DM13, green infrastructure, due to the harm it would cause to the landscape and visual amenities. In less than a fortnight's time, our government will host COP26. The Isle of Wight has the opportunity to embrace our status as a biosphere and to lead the way against climate change by refusing this application on the basis of sound planning policies. Waverley recently refused a similar application, and we should follow suit. Should the applicant appeal, I will be writing to the Secretary of State, asking that he recovers the decision for his own determination. The government has recently signalled that it intends to take a greener approach towards planning. It is important that an application that goes to the heart of the government's new policy agenda is decided by those who are politically accountable, as is this committee. The overarching effects of climate change should not be disregarded by the Isle of Wight Planning Committee because of limited short-term financial gain. Paragraph 202 of the MPPF is clear that harm should be weighed against the public benefit. The harm in this case is clearly more significant than the benefit to the public. If you have any doubts about what I've said or feel you need more time, you have the option to vote for deferral. We cannot get this wrong. Please vote against this serious risk to our precious local environment by refusing this application. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Councillor Spink. I now have the Cabinet Member for the Environment, Councillor Jonathan Bacon. He is unable to be here, but he has sent in a written submission, and Mr. Bolter is going to read it now. Thank you.
Chair.
Yes.
Sorry, could I just have clarification on this? I did give you notice of this last week. It does seem a little unusual to me that you're allowing the Cabinet Member responsible for this, who's already taken a very clear public position on this, to address this committee, and I'd like to know why you've made that decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brodie, for that. And I did reconsider it today, but I do think it is relevant for the Cabinet Member who's responsible for our environment to actually put forward a view, and that is my right, and I have discretion of that, and I've used the discretion to allow that. Thank you.
Speaking as the Cabinet Member for the Environment, I am opposed to this application. I have followed it for a long time prior to becoming a councillor, both as chair of the AOMB Steering Committee and, through that role, as part of the team that gained and have been supporting biosphere status for the island. I wrote the objection to the application on behalf of the biosphere designation. In my view, new exploration for fossil fuels fails to accord in any way with how the island should go forward, both in terms of its economy and its environment. As such, my comments will be directed primarily to the principle of this application, as covered on pages 38 to 46 of the report. Locally, we have an apparent policy gap as things stand, and the report states that we must look to the MPPF for policy guidance. Having regard to this, the report before you places much reliance on the assertion that there is an economic justification for the application, and it refers to statements in that policy that fossil fuels will remain important while we transition to the use of greener fuels. However, the report fails to have adequate regard to the holistic picture or to the changes and developments in government policy which post-date the MPPF. The direction of travel is crystal clear, namely that we must forge ahead to the use of clean energy and that government intends to drive things in that direction. It is plain that the MPPF must be read in this context. Of course, at the very least, the MPPF makes it clear that what it supports is sustainable development. Oil is not sustainable. Even without overlaying the recent developments in government policy, a potentially environmentally damaging proposal to explore for a finite and no longer favoured resource cannot be supported by a sensible context-based reading of the policy that exists. Much weight is placed upon an alleged economic benefit from this proposal. However, whereas other points are dealt with at length in the report, I can find no passage in which the purported economic benefit is explained or quantified in any way. It has been established elsewhere that the operation at this site would deliver a limited supply of between 2 to 12 days worth of oil. This does not provide any sufficient economic justification. The point about the possible supply being no more than a few days long further highlights the fact that this is about a very finite resource and not something that is sustainable. It must also be noted that the report makes it clear that local benefits from employment and so on will be minimal. Our local policy gap is referred to. However, what we do not know is that the new island plan, when approved, will contain, recognise and support two things that are already very much in place. The first is our biosphere. I was deeply disappointed to see that this designation was dealt with in just 4 paragraphs of the report and that no regard has apparently been given to the objection written on behalf of the biosphere designation. The application today simply does not sit with the principles of the biosphere if, on no other basis, that it is not sustainable development. Secondly, we now have in place a climate change strategy. It is asserted in the report that the strategy doesn't object to oil. However, it certainly does not support it. Again, I query the interpretation placed upon policy here. The assertion at paragraph 8.16 that new drilling does not conflict with the climate change agenda is bizarre. It is like saying that a roast beef dinner does not conflict with someone being a vegan. Overall, I would suggest that there is a clear policy in place that directs that this application should be refused. The interpretation that the policies referred to actively support drilling is wrong. There is pragmatism in the policy base, recognising that fossil fuels will remain relevant for some time, but this does not justify new drilling, which is what is proposed here. This view is of course supported and substantiated by the fact that what is supported is that which is sustainable. Finite fossil fuels fail this test on all counts. I would therefore submit that members of the Planning Committee can and should use their judgment in deciding what the policy base they make their decision on actually says. I think it clear that, while it might support some ongoing reliance on oil, it plainly does not support new drilling for fossil fuels. On top of this, if you have regard to the unsubstantiated nature of the assertions in relation to economic benefit and the fact that what is proposed is plainly not sustainable, then this application must be rejected.
Thank you. At this particular point, as I said before, we'll have a 5-minute comfort break, and then I will then ask Mr. Chicks to come back on any things he wishes to raise from the speakers, and then we will open it up to questions for members. We will then have a debate, and then I will call for proposals in regard to the application. So if every, just check the time. It's 17:21 now. If we could come back by, well, we say 5:30, really, to sort of round that. Okay, we'll start again at 5:30. Thank you. Can I call everybody back now?
Yep.
Can we? Mr. Bolter, can we start? Thank you. Firstly, Mr. Chick, do you want to respond to any of the speakers? Yep. Thank you.
Just a couple of very quick points of clarification then. In one of the statements, a statement was made that the MPPF is older than the energy guidance that's been issued by government. In fact, the MPPF is only a month old. It was reissued in September 2021, so it is up to date. In any case, its sort of hook for energy is that you should take into account energy policies when looking at a planning application for this type of development. So in essence, the NPPF wouldn't come out of date with those policies, because even if they're updated, they're linked anyway. And then one more point, there was a comment made that the application site is grade 3 in terms of agriculture. It is grade 4. I've looked at the various maps when I wrote the report, and it is, surprisingly, even to me, it is termed as grade 4 in the maps that we've seen. Sorry, the MPPF is July 2021. Too many document updates. Apart from that, Chairman, members have the recommendation in front of them, and we're happy to take any questions.
Thank you. If we now open up to... Can I just point something out to people on the screen? You can see a sort of hand there. People on the screen and other than registered speakers cannot speak. So we need to put that to people. So please, can you put your hand down, because I'm not going to allow you to speak. Thank you. Questions from members. Councillor Churchman, your question.
Thank you, Chair. I'm concerned about the economical side of this. Both the applicant and the officers have talked about helping the island's economy. Quite frankly, I can't believe this. We're talking about mostly people coming into the island, and a possibility of 3 to 6 security guards. I mean, what's 3 to 6 security guards? What good does that do to our economy?
Specific question. This is a question.
Right, and also HGV drivers. I want to know how this is going to help our economy, because I just do not see it. Red Funnel will do well, but apart from Red Funnel, where is the money coming into the island, please? Thank you.
Thank you. Have you got that? This is it. Yep, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. So yes, I was expecting a question on this. I mean, officers' view is that the benefits of this scheme are very much at the national scale. National planning policy framework advises that great weight should be given to the benefits, including to the economy, of minerals development. Hydrocarbons are considered a mineral for the purposes of planning policy. In terms of the benefits, I've written down a few things, what those benefits are. So oil is used to power electricity and heating vehicles and industrial installations. We all know that the role that oil will play in those sectors in future will reduce. There's no doubt about that. The government's energy statements that come out and the white paper, the government's 10-point plan, make it very clear that the role for fossil fuels will diminish over the next few years, and certainly when net zero comes in, the net zero target by 2050. But that will be a gradual process. It has to be, because there is a great reliance on fossil fuels at the moment. In addition, oil is a raw material for many of the items that we use in our lives. It's used for asphalt for the roads. It's used for plastics, synthetic materials such as clothing, tyres, plastic parts of your car. All manner of things. Oil is a very important raw material. So that they are the benefits, if you like, that they're a national benefit, that the oil, like many of the products related to energy, goes off to a national system. So electricity produced on the Isle of Wight for solar goes into the national grid. Gas produced on the Isle of Wight by the AD plant goes off to the national grid, and oil is no different to that. It would be used on a national basis. But this application obviously is for exploration, and that is a necessary part of the process of potential usage of oil. And as I said earlier, those exploration, appraisal, production phases are all separate, but can be applied for in a kind of interlinked way. So that's a quick summary, really, of the benefits of oil.
May I?
Would you like a supplementary question?
May I ask a supplementary question? Thank you. We are talking about a planning permission now for this drilling. We're not talking about the ifs and buts and maybes. We're talking about now a 3-year contract. And I want to know how that is going to help the economy of the island. 2 drills have been put in on that site, and nothing was ever found. So we're on a wing and a prayer. However, this planning application over 3 years, how is that going to benefit our economy, please?
Yeah, I mean, firstly, I'll correct you on the historic drilling exploration. The second exploration in the 1970s did confirm the presence of oil in the geological strata that it targeted. So it did confirm the oil. At the time, it wasn't financially viable to recover that oil. What the applicants are looking at is the exploration of that confirmed resource. And exploration and appraisal are necessary parts of the overall process of recovering oil as a constituent part of the energy mix for this country, and also raw materials that are used for many of the things that we can even see in this room. It is a necessary part. And the NPPF says that we should give great weight to those benefits. So although the benefits locally may be difficult to understand, it is on a national basis. And, you know, in terms of if, buts and maybes, the statistics show that the UK uses 1.19 million barrels of oil a day. So, and a lot of that is imported. And what the energy statements are saying is that alongside the need to provide renewables, which we all agree on, we all know that, there's also a combined need with that for energy security, which is indigenous UK-1 energy sources. And what these documents are saying is that fossil fuels will diminish over that time. They have to because of the potential pollution that they cause. But none of those documents rule out its use. None of them say there should be a ceiling level of how much you should get out of a potential oil well. None of them say that there's a minimum amount that you should get out of an oil well. So what officers are advising you on is what the policies say, which is that there should be an energy mix going forward and now, and in that mix, fossil fuels will reduce, but they won't be ruled out. And that's effectively all I can say on that issue.
Okay, I have 4 other councillors now that wish to speak. They're Councillor Jarman, Councillor Brodie, Councillor Quirk and Councillor Price. To start with Councillor Jarman. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I wouldn't wish to hog all the time, given the large number of other councillors who wish to speak on this, so I'll limit myself to one of my questions. The UCOG presentation, and I'm very mindful of what Vanessa said about the economic benefits, but even if we move on and take the broader view of considering a national prospectus here at the end of the game. The UCOG presentation of 2018, which talked about the 3 strata and a possible reserve of some 15 million barrels, although perhaps a much lower percentage of that being recoverable, is superseded by the UCOG corporate presentation comparing recoverables from their various sites. That presentation, dated July 2021, attributes the recoverables on page 10 and 11 from the Arreton site as between 2.5 and 2.7 million barrels, which, instead of equating for 15 days of the UK supply, equates for only 2 days of the UK supply. That seems to be a considerable change in the weighting which needs to be applied to that measure. Does that change the view of the planning officers and their weighting of this application? Thank you.
It doesn't change officers' views. I mean, ultimately, we're working within the policy framework that we're given. And as I said, that policy framework doesn't say, you know, a well should produce a certain amount of oil. Policy framework, national policy framework, says great weight should be given to mineral products, which are needed for our everyday needs. And that's set out within the officer report. And that great weight has to be put in the balance, of course. Now, officers have reached a conclusion on balance. Councillors can reach a different view. There's nothing wrong with that. That's your power, if you like, as a councillor. The officers' views set out in the report, and nothing that I've heard has changed that assessment in my mind as an officer.
Councillor John, you have a supplementary question?
Yeah, so just to be clear, your view that a change of 15-day supply to 2-day supply doesn't affect the consideration of your report or the weighting it should be given?
Yeah, when I wrote the report, I was aware of the information we had to hand, which was that there was about a 2-day supply of oil in the well. So that's, you know, based on those statistics that we had. But that's not to say that that's not a significant amount of oil. I mean, that's 2-day supply now. It would be a much greater amount of supply when this nation gets to where it should be in terms of the renewables mix, when oil is a much lesser supply element. But ultimately, what the government guidance doesn't do is apportion a certain amount of oil to a specific geographical area of the country and say this part of the country should contribute this part of the country should contribute this amount. What it says is that minerals are beneficial and that great weight should be given to those benefits, particularly to the economy. And I think one of the points made was that look, when we have renewables, when renewables are the greater mix of energy, there will be periods when their contribution to the energy mix will be less. So this year, for example, energy consumption for this year is 33% up from last year for the last quarter. Now, that's understandable because this time last year or the last quarter we were in lockdown, so we were using less energy. But one important statistic is that the contribution of wind, for example, is significantly reduced this year because of still conditions. So that shows how the weather can affect the mix of renewables and what they deliver to the grid. And what that has resulted in is a greater use of gas, which had to be imported from Norway. And that runs contrary, of course, to what national energy policies are saying, which is we shouldn't be importing our energy if we want to be energy secure. And therefore, you know, the conclusion officers reach is that it is an important element of our energy mix.
Thank you. Can I go to Councillor Brodie?
Yeah, before I say anything, Chair, I'd just like to stress this isn't a court of law where we're going to interrogate Mr. Chick. At the end of the day, he's a planning officer who uses his professional expertise, and I think we should value that as members of the council. Thank you.
I support that.
Just to move on, in terms of the economic benefits, if this was approved, I wonder if Mr. Chick could just highlight for me the weight he gave in his consideration of this application to the potential effect on an important part of our economy, which is tourism. Tourism, SP4 within the existing island plan is an integral part of the island's economy. And as I pointed out on the site visit, although it wasn't mentioned in the presentation, it's an area well used by cyclists and walkers. Birchfield Lane, which runs from Blackwater and eventually to Sandown, is very well used by tourists. And I have always seen cycling and walking as being integral to our aspirations to offer a high quality tourism offer to visitors to the Isle of Wight. Can you just, stress for us or underline for us, Mr. Chick, what consideration you gave to the potential negative effects on the tourism officer, the tourist part of our economy, if this application were approved? Thank you.
I think it is a difficult question to answer, because how do you state in a sort of a dividing up the pie, if you like, how important that particular route is in terms of tourism? I think all we can say is we all know as islanders that the track between Newport and Sandown is very popular. There's no doubt about that. If you go there during the week, there's people cycling up and down it and walking up and down it. At the weekend, even more. In the summer holidays, as we've probably all experienced, it was very, very busy because it is a really attractive route. So the other point I would make is that the officer conclusion is a balanced conclusion. So it's finely balanced. And that's why it's right this application is at committee, because it is a finely balanced issue. There are competing issues, and the MPPF recognises that. The Island Plan recognises that. You are balancing social, economic and environmental issues. The way officers have balanced it up is based on our experience, how we interpret policy and what we've seen on the ground. And as the officer report says, those issues in terms of landscape and visual impacts, which are related to tourism, there's no doubt about it, because tourists will use that route, are temporary impacts. They're not permanent impacts. They are temporary. And so what the officer report says is that when going along the cycle track, parts of that development will be visible from parts of that cycle track at distance, but still looking up in certain areas, particularly along Birchmoor Lane, where there's gaps in the oak trees along there, quite big gaps, past Merston Manor. The site will be visible and it will look out of place. There's no getting away from that. It will be an industrial development in a rural area. There's some mitigating factors in that looking west, there's a very large quarry, well established, and around the corner, there's the AD plant, although arguably that's not really seen in dual views, in combined views, if you like, with the application site. So officers have recommended that there would be significant harm in the landscape and visual respect, but those harms are temporary, and then following the completion of the development with those proposed restorations, the proposed enhancements, if you like, the trees, the hedge planting, the wildflower planting, there would be a benefit to the appearance of the site, but it would be returned ultimately to its land level. And so after 3 years, once restored, the land would go back. And that's why we've recommended there's only a temporary impact, and that tips the balance. But that's the officer conclusion.
What's your question, Councillor Brodie?
Thank you, Mr. Chick. Would you accept that significant harm, albeit temporary, is still harm?
That's absolutely right. I mean, we've all been at committee where we've looked at developments and we've seen change, and officers have recommended that is not harmful. Change isn't always harmful. Officers have recommended that this is harmful, but for a temporary period.
Thank you. Can I have now Councillor Quirk?
Thank you very much. A couple of things I'd like officers' comments on. The first is there's been the inference that we're going to be using a lot of oil and gas for a long way into the future. The Oil and Gas Authority actually have their own projections that are in the public domain that say that between 2020 and 2040, they expect oil and gas usage in the UK to drop by over 75%. So there is a substantial reduction, and we already do have capacity within the country. And I suspect that will, following the conference next week, that will actually probably go down rather than up. So a comment on that. The second one is the Environment Agency made no comment. The Environment Agency is responsible for ensuring that the aquifers are not in any way damaged. One would have liked to think that the Environment Agency has done a thorough risk assessment in relation to this and actually can guarantee that there will be no damage to the aquifer, or guarantee the remediation of that if there is any such contamination. Can you expand on that? Because one would hope that they actually have done something rather than just not made a comment.
Mr. Chick.
Thank you, Councillor Quirk. Yeah, I mean, in terms of the use of oil, yes, its use will reduce over the period up until 2050. You hope it would. But as I say, the other part of the policies also say that imports should reduce, by saying we need fuel security. So, and a great deal of the oil that we use is imported. So there's competing issues there, obviously. But I think the point that I would make is that as a planning authority, the decision needs to be in line with what the policy guidance is at the moment. Now, we know that from the National Planning Policy Guidance that we have to consider energy policies. We know from the white paper that energy policies will be reviewed, but we also have other government documents that show the direction of travel. So we have the white paper, net zero. We also have the government's 10-point plan, those documents that I showed in the PowerPoint earlier, and they all say about having an energy mix which is dominated by renewables, which we'd all like, but they don't rule out the use of oil, but they set out, if you're going to use these products, how they should be used. They should be used in a more cleaner, responsible way, and if needs to be, there should be offset as well, so that those policies also refer to offset. So my conclusion in terms of principle would be there's nothing that rules out the use of oil, and actually the National Planning Policy Framework says that a great weight should be attached to the use of minerals. In terms of the EA, they did comment. They commented, I think, probably another time around, said no comment, but that's because they'd already commented. So I suppose my comment on that would be, if they hadn't commented on the application, we wouldn't be here now. I'd still be on the phone and emailing the EA to say, come on, we need your comments. But we did get their comments. They commented on this development in a technical sense. What I would remind councillors is that the planning authority will not control everything that this development would do, or all of its impacts. Those impacts below the ground are for other regulatory bodies with better knowledge of the scientific background to this kind of operation. And they include, obviously, the Environment Agency, Natural England commenting on issues that go to the Environment Agency, the Health and Safety Inspectorate, and the Oil and Gas Authority. The comments of the EA didn't object to the development. They actually said that the hydrogeological risk assessment was acceptable. And the point is that these issues, while they're not to be covered by the planning authority, they are still material considerations. The planning authority can't be reckless and just say, we don't even care about these things. They're dealt with by someone else. We have to know that this development and the applicant would follow guidance. And the way we know is all the technical reports that have been provided to us, and they refer to the fact that the development would be carried out in accordance with best practice guidance issued by those regulatory bodies, and also within the actual permits regimes that those bodies issue and the drilling licenses issued by the OTA. So the agency has commented on that information, and the fact that they have not objected and said that actually HRA is acceptable gives the planning authority and officers The benefit, I suppose, of sort of those risks are covered by those documents, and then they would be covered in a much greater level of detail via those relevant processes that the other bodies will undertake.
Supplementary question. Thank you.
I get it that they've done their hydrological survey. Are we confident that they have looked at the aquifers? The aquifers on the Isle of Wight are the same aquifers that cover Hampshire. They supply a very significant part of the water supply for the Isle of Wight and Hampshire, and they feed 70% of all of the chalk streams in the world. That's a very significant damage to the environment if something goes wrong. Are we confident that they have adequately and fully assessed those risks? And have they fully assessed how they would the remediation would be carried out and funded if there were to be some catastrophic event?
So in terms of the risks then, I mean, the HRA, not the HABS Risk Assessment, got the same acronym unfortunately, the Hydrogeological Risk Assessment, horrible word to say, refers to the presence of those aquifers, and it notes what those aquifers do. So provides the drinking water for the Isle of Wight. Also, the water taken for those aquifers are also linked to the River Yar through what's called an augmentation scheme. So water is taken from the Medina to top up the River Yar if it's low, and there's ecological reasons for that. It's an agreement between Southern Water and the relevant bodies. So the site is hydrogeologically linked to both the Medina and the Yar because of the water that is taken out of the Medina. So the HRA considers that. It sets out how the development would be undertaken to minimise those risks. So firstly, and what is relevant to the planning authority, is surface water drainage. That is an issue for the planning authority to consider. It's something we consider regularly, so we have to know how to do it, and it is relevant to us. So the information within the HRA and the environmental statement set out that the drill compound would be underlain by this geotextile membrane, and the reason for that is that it wouldn't allow any liquid that seeped into that well compound area to then seep through it and into the underlying soils. There's also a drainage ditch around it, so in periods of rainfall, any surface water from that site goes into that drain around it. The membrane goes into that drain as well, so it's sealed. It's a sealed environment, and the site, a bit like a car parking space, would be angled, tilted to drain into those ditches. Now, unlike most developments where you have hydrocarbon interceptors and silt ducts and things like that to capture the drainage water before it goes off into the River Medina, it doesn't do that. The water collected from this site would be collected in tanks and it would be tankered away. So those tankers would be completely sealed. They are subject to Environment Agency regulations in how you transport pollutive liquids. And they would be taken off to an Environment Agency approved site for treatment. Can't tell you whether that's on the Isle of Wight or not, but we know that they would have to go to those EA approved sites because the permits that the EA issue will have to show where that waste would go. And then in terms of the underground environment, if you like, which is not controlled by the planning authority, but we do need to know that the well would be safe, that the information sets out how the well is constructed. It would include the required steel liners, concrete structure to surround that well. As you can probably tell, I'm not an expert on it, but that is why the Health and Safety Executive, the Oil and Gas Authority and the EA are the main bodies that deal with those issues. And what they are telling us is the HRA is fit for purpose. That HRA sets out in detail how the well will be constructed and the measures in place to prevent leakages between the strata, the geological strata itself, and also from the well. And so we, as officers, we're satisfied that the HRA does consider those issues properly, because the correct consultee on that, with the scientific background to assess the HRA for the underground part of this site, have told us that it is fit for purpose.
The other bit of the question was, who pays if it all goes wrong?
Councillor.
Thank you, Chairman. Actually, the questions I originally had have actually already been asked, but the something that I think all members of the committee are probably looking for is something that demonstrates to us a local economic benefit. We understand the global and national benefit of oil extraction and for how it's used in all the different things we use. But is it possible, and I don't want to put the plan officer on the spot here, really, but there must be some local economic benefit. I can't think of one. There's not one come up so far. Could you give us three? There must be three economic benefits to the Isle of Wight from this. There must be. I'll give you an example. For instance, there would be a benefit to the local infrastructure if the carbuncle of a junction was improved at Arreton and Down End, which these HGVs are quite clearly going to use, and there isn't. But is there any other example that you could give us, a benefit?
Not particularly, no. I mean, as the Officer report notes, the economic benefits of this scheme, as officers see it, are national benefits. It is a temporary scheme. It's not like a scheme where there's some sort of permanent development where we would ask the applicant to provide some sort of financial commitment for a Section 106 agreement, something like that, to provide some upgrades if they were necessary. And that's the point. Are they necessary? And the Highway Authority haven't objected on traffic capacity grounds, but in terms of local economic benefits, they're difficult to quantify because the number of staff on the site is quite minimal. It's only a 3-year period, and the benefits of minerals development in terms of oil are very much on a national basis. Just down the road, you have obviously the quarry. The benefits of that quarry are very well known. That quarry provides land, sand and gravel for the Isle of Wight. It's used on the Isle of Wight. And so we know those benefits, but it's a very different, although it's minerals, it's a very different context. And it is purely, really, a national context, as I see it.
Thank you, Chair. I'm a little bit concerned about the financial implications to the Isle of Wight Council. Should things not go as well as UCOG would hope, and they walk away from the site, about the who will be left and who would be financially liable to clearing up the site, and was there thought given to a financial bond to cover this in that situation?
What I'm trying to make the presentation do is flick through to a slide that I have on this. Doesn't want to move. Right, the technology has failed me, so I have to go to paper, I'm afraid. Just let me flick through where I need to be, and I'll read you out what the policy guidance says. So yes, we've considered whether a bond should be used. I mean, in terms of the financial scrutiny of the applicant, that is carried out at the stage when the pedal licence is issued by the Oil and Gas Authority. They do a check on the financial stability of the company that is bidding, or the various companies that no doubt would have bid for this licensing area. So that is the stage at which those checks are made. Now, there is a lot of guidance on the National Planning Policy Guidance website about minerals development, and particularly oil and gas development. That advice is that planning conditions should generally be used to control restoration. The requirement for restoration land lies with the minerals operator and in default the landowner. So the council wouldn't be responsible. Say if restoration didn't take place for any reason, the landowner would be who we would go and call upon for that restoration. But the MPPF advises that bonds and other financial guarantees should only be used in exceptional circumstances. And quite helpfully, the paragraph 48 of the National Planning Guidance sets out what those exceptional cases would be. So they would be very long-term new projects where progressive reclamation is not practicable, such as an extremely large limestone quarry. So it's looking at much bigger developments really. Rather the application that we're looking at now, it's got quite a minor land take. Where a novel approach or technique is to be used. Obviously, the application in front of us is similar to other developments that have been looked at in other parts of the UK. So it's not a novel process, and where there is reliable evidence of the likelihood of either financial or technical failure. But as I say, the Oil and Gas Authority do those financial standing checks when the licence is awarded. So the view of officers is that the financial guarantee, using a bond wouldn't be applicable in this circumstance.
Thank you. I have got a hand from Councillor Jarman, but I'm conscious of other members that haven't spoken or asked questions. Sorry? I didn't see your hand there, Councillor Drew. Councillor Drew.
A lot of focus has been put on the temporary nature of the harm caused. So I know that asbestos was found in the site. I understand that there is a suggestion that we'd impose a condition which would be for remediation of that. Given that the World Health Organization suggests that there is no safe exposure to asbestos, even one fibre is sufficient to cause mesothelioma, can we be absolutely sure, and I sort of probably imagine what the answer might be, but can we be absolutely sure that we can guarantee that 100% remediation of asbestos can take place? And I'd also be interested to know what subtype and whereabout in the site it was found. Thank you.
Mr. Chick.
Yes, so in terms of contamination, site surveys were undertaken and they identified small amounts of asbestos, I think in a couple of locations on the site. Trying to find the right section of the report, contamination. Here we are. Sorry, yeah, yes. Ground contamination surveys returned one sample of asbestos. So the Council's Environmental Health Officer has advised that a condition should be imposed that would require a pre-construction asbestos survey to be undertaken and, if found necessary, a removal and remediation scheme to be agreed. So effectively what the Environmental Health Officer has said is it's not a constraint to the development, it's an issue that can be controlled by conditions.
Okay. I'm very conscious of, sorry, Councillor Besson, you haven't spoken, so.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Cartwright, in his presentation, gave us quite a specific figure to a financial benefit to the Isle of Wight of £30 million. I'm quite interested to hear how that's arrived at. Is that, so my question is that the assumption on the supply of oil? Because as Councillor Jarman quite rightly points out, that could be a 2-day supply or a 12-day supply of oil. So I'm quite interested to how we get to that specific figure of 30 million.
Mr. Chick, did you get that question?
Yeah, I don't know how that £30 million figure was reached.
I'm just conscious, is there anyone that wish to speak that hasn't, sorry, ask a question that hasn't so far? Councillor Adams.
It was mentioned, Mr. Cartwright mentioned that it makes no sense when we have this resource under our feet. It's also been mentioned about the energy, securing energy supplies. I believe the amount is negligible, and I believe the damage that it will cause sourcing this.
So what's the question?
In the islands. So it's just, I don't see the sense in taking this out of the ground. It's
is there a question?
Where are the, getting back to what Michael's just said, where are the economic benefits? This wasn't viable in the 70s, and I don't believe it's viable now. Could we have more evidence of that viability?
We've probably answered that question a number of times. So, do you feel you've answered that, Mr. Chick, prior?
Yes, thank you, Chairman.
Okay.
I have a couple of questions regarding highways. We talk about 15 movements. That means 30 trips, because I presume the movement is one way. So we're talking about 30 trips. It affects the economy because the route being chosen to Red Funnel passes the Gore, where we have the anaerobic digester, and that is a terribly busy at times of the year. Arreton Barnes, and at the top you've got Robin Hill. Now, have those factors been taken into account during the July-August season? Because I know from bitter experience, the queues both up the hill and coming down the hill to Arreton. So could Highways please comment on that? And just one added point, where does the water come from to wash the tyres of the lorries as they leave the site? Thank you.
Yep, okay. Yeah, the obviously the traffic data provided is 15 two-way movement, so that's basically 7 or 8 vehicles in, 7 or 8 vehicles out. So it's 15 movements in total. So it's an average. So it's not like you've got 7.5 going in and 7.5 coming out. It's an average figure. So that is during the operation. The figures also provided that during construction there's a maximum of 52 two-way movements. So again, it's about 26 in, 26 out. So which again, on the impact on the wider network is a small number. It's not causing too much of an impact. So with regards to the route, obviously it was looked at. I honestly can't say whether figures for basically the holiday season was taken into account. But again, it's just those total figures, and it's basically a percentage. It needs to be, if it's more than 5% percentage, it's deemed as an area of concern. But obviously those figures on the volume of traffic that is already using that route is minuscule. So it's not deemed to cause a significant highway capacity issue. So, okay. The water, I've got no idea about water, so that's not a highway issue. So,
Chick, is there a supply of water to wash the tyres?
Well, I've walked the site many times and I've not seen a standpipe on site at all. I'd imagine it would be stored in one of the water tanks at the site, and then it would then serve the wheel wash. But the wheel wash operation, drainage scheme, those matters are things that would be agreed by conditions, and that we'd expect that information should the development be approved. But yes, I mean, in terms of the water for that wheel wash, I would imagine it would be tanked water stored at the site.
Thank you, Chairman. I was prompted to this by Councillor Oliver's insightful remark earlier. We're aware from the officer's report that the licensing authority requires proof for the drilling, plugging and abandonment, but no bond or insurance, as I think Mr. Thorne just flashed up briefly on the screen before, is required for consequential or contamination of our aquifer. I wondered if the officers could respond, please, to the statement in the Southern Water reply to the UCOR application for an environment permit on the 8th of July this year, very recently, where they state, due to the proposed site being sensitively located within the total groundwater catchment for Southern Water's licensed groundwater lower greensand group augmentation extractions, any contamination of the lower greensand group aquifer potentially caused by the construction operation of a hydrocarbon exploration well at Arraton does pose a risk of potential hydrological risk to the Southern Water resources. So Southern Water clearly giving a rather alarming risk there, and no matter how small, the consequences, as we heard, would be catastrophic. Is there a response to the Southern Water observation?
Yes, it's a risk that's highlighted in the hydrogeological risk assessment, and it's also highlighted in the officer report. It's a risk we know exists, but there is best practice guidance on how wells should be constructed in order to avoid those risks. And the HRA in the environmental statement refer to that guidance and confirm that the well will be constructed in accordance with it. The permitting process is the right process for those detailed impacts to the aquifer to be considered. And obviously a permit has been applied for, and Southern Water have highlighted quite correctly, and I would expect them to do so, a risk that could occur. And no doubt the Environment Agency will take that into consideration when they look at the permit, and they'll ensure that whatever techniques are used to construct the well are put in place to make that risk minimal. But that's not the planning authority's role. That is the role of the Environment Agency, and as you can see, that role is taking place at the moment.
Thank you. I'm now going to open up to the debate, and then at the end of point, I will then call for proposals. Does anybody wish to start the debate, put their view? Councillor Churchman.
I'll start it. Looking at it environmentally, I'm very concerned. When we got up to Blackwater Hollow on our site visit and looked across, this site is absolutely there in your face. We already have a rather ugly quarry further down the road, so I don't think we need any more there. But also what worries me is the fact this site has been drilled twice before and nothing has been found. Why are we doing it all again? I mean, I just really can't understand it. But environmentally, it's going to affect the Bembridge Trail, as Councillor Rhodey said. It's going to affect the views from various places. If you stand in Arraton Barns, you've got the rig which comes above the top of the hill. I mean, on such a tiny island, who wants that as a view? Our tourist economy is worth 520 million, folks. That was what the MP has come through saying. Are we really prepared to put any amount of that in jeopardy by having a drilling site in such, to me, conspicuous place? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I come from a trade that relies heavily on fossil fuel powered cars, and I love cars, and I love everything about combustion engines, but you know, they're last century's technology, let's face it, And while there will still be a place in all of our lifetimes for that technology, things are moving rapidly. You know, do I think that for road vehicles, electric is the answer? Absolutely not. It's almost certainly going to be hydrogen. And those advances are coming very quickly. So we have a decision to make, and it's a balance, and it is a weighted decision on the harm against the benefit. The benefit is nationally and globally finding oil and having that oil to burn, essentially, and used for other products. If the oil is found, it will, I would suggest, with my limited knowledge, that drilling it and extracting it on land would probably be uneconomical. Transporting millions of barrels of oil across land is highly unlikely, I would suggest, on the Isle of Wight, given the other transport costs. It would probably have to be extracted from the sea, offshore somewhere. That possibly would not involve the Isle of Wight Council at all. Anyway, I could be entirely wrong there, but I would suggest that it wouldn't be drilled and extracted on land. I would be very surprised if it is. We can't really see any local benefit at all. I wanted to be, I've said this before, I wanted to sit here and be convinced that there was a benefit to the Isle of Wight. And I can only see negatives at this point. The damage that it would cause potentially to our environment, if it went wrong, could be catastrophic. We've heard about the potential to damage to water systems, which none of us have much knowledge of, but the potential is there. That is part of this decision tonight. It's not necessarily a planning decision, and I think the officers have had a really hard application to deal with here, because when you look at the site and the highways issues, actually, from a planning perspective, there's very little visual impact. There's going to be areas, like Vanessa said, that you will see. The construction phase is going to be horrible, and all the vehicles coming and going is going to be horrible. There's going to be noise for the local residents, without a doubt, and there's the potential what could be left behind. There are a lot of difficult things for us to compute here, and I think the biosphere status that we have is so unique that if we don't fight to protect that tonight, then we will make a really, really bad decision. I don't want to take things that other people have got to say, but there seems to be multiple reasons for this to be refused, and I'd be quite happy to discuss those when the time comes. Thank you.
Do I have further ones of debate? Councillor.
I raised the question of the aquifers. I understand if the Environment Agency says that the risk is very low, but actually a very low risk is, in my mind, an unacceptable risk. The aquifers, petrol is very useful to us. Water is essential to us. We need it to live. And the aquifers provide a lot of the water, because they're not only the direct access to the aquifers, but actually they feed the streams and rivers of Hampshire and the Isle of Wight. So I think that's really important. If we don't reject this, I think we should defer it and actually get chapter and verse from the Environment Agency on what the risks are, because I don't accept that a small risk is acceptable. And I think we have to be totally convinced that this is pretty much zero risk, and that any risk that there is a solution to it, and who pays, and hopefully not us. And the landowner, well, the landowner will just go bust. So the landowner's not going to, if someone's got £1 billion remediation, the landowner will just go bust. So that isn't a solution. There has to be a real solution to this for it to be acceptable in my mind. I haven't received the confidence that the aquifers are protected. I'm sorry.
Thank you. Councillor Oliver.
Thank you, Chair. I have, again, financial issues, if you like, and as much as you've got over 30 conditions attached to this application, and with the planning department being stretched as they already are, are these conditions actually going to be monitored as tightly as they should be? Again, with the Environment Agency and the other agencies which have to monitor this, financially, I cannot see that they've got the manpower to actually keep on top of this application, and this drilling, operation as it's going through.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm a little confused by the logical fallacy in terms of some of the justifications. We're told at page 61, paragraph 7.94, the development would result in harmful landscape impacts that would be contrary to the guidance, but on a temporary basis, and I understand that. But when we're talking about the economic justification, we've been told by a number of speakers that this is going to be potentially a benefit, if not to the island, then nationally, but on a longer term basis. Now, I'm not sure which is it. Is it on a temporary basis that we're examining this, or is it actually going to be weighted against a long-term economic impact, which actually, to me, seems outside the scope of this application? My understanding was this application purely relates to the exploration, and therefore we seem to have, on the one hand, when we're undertaking this balancing exercise, we're being told to balance that against the economic justification, which takes into account the long-term impact. But then when actually the mitigation of the harms, which are clear and manifest, we're told that this is purely on a temporary basis. So there's this weird logical fallacy, which I'm a little unclear of. And I think that's, for me, that's significant. Thank you.
Councillor Christensen.
I listened to the local... I was gone off again, sorry, I'm on now. I listened to the local councillor's speech, which was done by Councillor Quirk, which was really important. I think that led to many of the points that we need to consider, that the industrial arrangement in this area would be significant and there would be significant harm, and that Councillor Ellis put forward many points we need to make sure we have considered in depth tonight, because we do need to ensure we have the biosphere. AONB is hugely important to our areas, and we just need to make sure the integrity of that's our decision here as Isle of Wight councillors, and just remember the importance of that. Thank you.
Sorry, thank you. Can I have a further, Councillor Brodie?
Yeah, just one. I mean, I'm against this application, and the more I've listened to this evening, I've been against it. But as ever, I'm always looking beyond the decision-making process in this room. It's quite clear that Officer Mr. Chick, and the team in planning are working in a very difficult situation with a government whose planning policy seems all over the place, in my view, and the Isle of Wight Council without, a contemporary core planning strategy, so we're still working off of one that's 9 years old. They've made a recommendation, which, is unpopular. Some members of the public don't understand it's purely a recommendation. It's not automatic at all. But the potential subsequently, of course, is for an appeal. And as it stands, my estimation would be that if it went to a planning inspector, it would be overturned. However, a very interesting comment made in Councillor Ellis's submission through Councillor Spink was that the first thing she would do, if they appealed, was to ask for the Secretary of State to call this in. Now, I'm just interested in whether officers have a view, or the legal officer, as to the likelihood of success in that situation. It's not going to change the way I vote on this, but I am actually always concerned about use of the taxpayers' money through the planning process. Historically, this committee, many years ago, was losing a lot of appeals, costing the council taxpayer a lot of money. It's one of the main reasons I came on this committee, having treated it with a very long stick for about the first 10 years of my time on this council. But it is something I would just like a view on, really. But as I say, it's not going to change my view, and I think it's going to be turned down probably unanimously. But I think we should always know potentially what the consequences are. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Thorne? Councillor, sorry, I called you Councillor Thorne there. Sorry, Justin. Do you wish to answer that question? Which of you would like to? I'm just conscious that I know we've moved on to debate and question, but I think Councillor Brodie's point is, I think, a quite important one. So, would you like to answer that legal question?
Well, the Secretary of State has power to call it in, which I think is the legal answer. The likelihood of that happening is not a legal answer. That is the Secretary of State's decision.
Okay.
Could I make
Councillor
a comment?
Chairman, yes.
Could I make a comment, Chairman? When Tesco's rebuilt the store at Ryde, that was called in by the Secretary of State because it was outside the settlement boundary, it was partly on agricultural ground, so therefore it was called in. So I would suggest there might be a good chance it could happen again. Obviously, we'd have to get behind the MP, but I'm just relating history for you. Thank you.
Okay, I'm just again very conscious of the time. My own comment that I will now come forward. Listening to all the facts, and I was very interested in from the local parish council, and also from a number of the other speakers. And I'm probably very similar to other members that I found it very difficult to really find the kind of benefit or the benefits to the island. And I feel that the national argument, especially with what is going on in the world, right? Difficult to really understand that. I am concerned, I think, of a point, I think it was Councillor Brodie pointed out or it might have been Councillor Churchman, I apologise for which one, about how much money this comes to our economy. And the temporary thing worries me because 3 years could absolutely devastate our tourist industry. We are coming out of a difficult pandemic. and we are giving much more a kind of eco-tourism on this island, and people are clearly coming to this island, and we rely on those stay stations. If in 3 years we have something that could really damage that, it would be very hard for our tourism to come back. And that really worries me and concerns me, and that will affect my final decision tonight on how I vote.
Yeah, well, I would like him to make a proposal, Chair, that we refuse the application based on economics, because I think most of us agree we see no benefit over 3 years. The probable damage to our island economy as regards tourism. The reason people are coming to the island at the moment is they don't want to go abroad. Well, let's keep it that way, that we keep them wanting to come here. Why go abroad? So economy, which could be damaged. I think the damage to the infrastructure of our roads, and thirdly, certainly environmentally, I think it is a disaster. I know it might be a grade 4 field. However, folks, we have to eat. We need to start farming far more. And if we take up another field, take out another field of production, it takes years to get a field back into agricultural production, whether it's for beef or growing things. So we really don't need to lose another one. So my proposal is that we refuse the application, Chair.
Is there a seconder for that proposal? So,
Just be more specific about that, perhaps. Could we, the grounds for, I mean, I think we should fasten it on the island plan to start off with. SP4, which I alluded to earlier on tourism, I would suggest that we refuse it on the basis that the application will compromise the integrity of the island's natural environment, which is part of our high quality tourism aspirations. I think that's almost word for word taken out of SP4. I'd also like to use SP5 if it's sustainable regarding the environment, that the application will have a demonstrably adverse impact on the island's natural environment. I don't think there's any doubt about that, whether it's temporary or whatever, it will have an adverse effect. So I think they added them into what Councillor Churchman says. I think you've got a proposal that we could vote on with those two. Councillor Churchman's mentioned some issues. Frankly, I think you could probably start adding to the list, but at least you've got something to start with. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you for that motion and the elaboration, Councillor Brodie. Officers have obviously been listening keenly to the debate that we've just been having. What I'd like to request, please, of the chairman is that we just take a brief couple of moments for officers to digest what members have just put forward and have a look at what that might look like.
I'm just conscious.
Thank you, Chairman. Sorry, I know Councillor Oliver wanted to speak, but I do have a few things to expand on the proposal, if that would be possible. I've got a number of things that I wanted to bring up, and I think you know, I've got policy headings that will cover those as well. Do you want me to list those now?
I think so.
Right, we've got SP5, as Councillor Brodie suggested, which is on page 67 of the Island Plan, paragraph 2, which is to protect the integrity of international and national and local designations, which is our biosphere status, which that's one thing to protect that. We've also got DM12, which is on page 168, paragraph 1. And paragraph 1 is again on DM12 to protect the integrity of international and national and local designations, which again is the biosphere, which this clearly would potentially jeopardise. We've also got DM13, and I specifically refer to 7.211, which is on, sorry, just 1 second, I'll find it for you. When I can find it, sorry, I've got new glasses today. DM13. It relates to green infrastructure. Once I've found DM13 again, 7.211, and I'm looking specifically at bullet point 5, which is making a positive contribution to combating climate change through adaptation and mitigation of impacts, which again this absolutely fails on. I'd also like to add into that, which I do think are absolutely relevant, and I just want to reinforce the island plan because it is 9 years old, but it's entirely relevant on all of this. It doesn't cover housing targets in this debate, but everything else is absolutely bang on in the island plan pretty much, and covers environmental issues beautifully. But I've got risk to water catchment, and there is a risk, however small or large that risk is. There is no defined local benefit whatsoever, and it is also contrary to the Isle of Wight Council's recently adopted climate and environmental strategy, regardless of whether it details fossil fuels or not. So I think there's quite a lot for you to work with there.
I will, I think we'll, how long do you need, Ollie? Do you need a 5 minutes? I'm going to.
We would accept all of that.
Can I just confirm that I have before I come to you, Councillor Quirk, sorry, that we have a proposal from Councillor Churchman, seconded by Councillor Brodie, and you have taken on board the side to add.
I was just going to propose that we actually agree to extend the meeting by up to 30 minutes to allow officers time and us to get back and discuss what they come back with.
Are you having, can I accept that as a proposal? Okay, can we have a proposal to extend from 7 o'clock for 30 minutes?
Half an hour.
Can I have a seconder to that? Councillor Brodie, can I have a show of hands that we agree to that? Thank you. We now can go to 7:30. Can we now have an adjournment?
Before you join.
Thank you.
There we are. Yeah, so officers have obviously heard the concerns that you voiced, which could formulate a reason for refusal. But officers, it'd be wise for officers just to outline the potential risks for the issues that multiple issues for a potential reason for refusal. And the first one that I want to refer to is the economics issue and the lack of a local benefit. The island plan does not have any guidance about hydrocarbons development. That guidance is outlined within the National Planning Policy Framework, and it says that you should give great weight to minerals developments. It doesn't say that an applicant has to identify the local benefits to the authority that's determining the application. It refers to the benefits of minerals developments. And then it defines in the glossary, as said in the report, that hydrocarbons are a mineral, they're an important mineral needed for everyday use. That's what the policies say. In terms of the next few years, moving towards net zero, the current government guidance does not rule out the use of oil. None of those statements say We shall not use oil. It says its share in the mix of energy will be much reduced, and that's right for climate change. That is the right approach. But on a policy basis, it does not say that the use of oil should be ruled out. There's no moratorium on it. So I would advise that there would be a risk of introducing a reason for refusal that dismissed the economic benefits of the proposals. Yes, this relates to exploration, it's not for production, but they are elements of a process, and we have to assess those in line with national policy. In terms of impacts on tourism, that is something that members can consider, but I would advise that policy SP4 is a permissive policy. It refers to accommodation, it refers to what we want for our tourism. In terms of damage to roads, that was not an issue raised by Island Roads. Your statutory consultee on the highway network has not raised any issue in terms of impacts on the highway, a highway that already caters for heavy goods vehicles every single day. In terms of compromising the natural environment, I think officers will need a lot more direction on what those harms are, in your opinion, considered to be. You have statutory consultees who have not objected to the development in terms of risk to the water environment. They are specialist consultees. They undertake the process for delivering the permits for the drilling, and in that process, they consider in great detail and scientific detail the potential risks to aquifers, and yet the agency have not objected to this development and have said that the hydrogeological risk assessment is acceptable. So I think it would be very difficult to identify where there is a lack of information on that particular issue, given that the Environment Agency, they haven't just said no objection, they've said the HRA is acceptable. So there would be significant risk there at an appeal situation. Could the planning authority provide any evidence at an appeal of harm to the water environment, given the agency, who are the statutory consultee, have raised no concerns? In terms of ecology then, if we're looking at biodiversity, again, Natural England have not objected to the development, and the Council's ecology officer also has not. There's a detailed ecological impact assessment which forms part of the environmental assessment. There's a habitat regulations assessment as well, and an appropriate assessment within that, which Natural England have ratified and confirmed that officers could adopt as the appropriate assessment for the Council's competent authority. So that issue in officers' minds has been considered. It's been considered in light of guidance. It's been considered in respect of Natural England's what they call TIN guidance, which is the guidance for how you assess impacts on badgers, bats, other protected species. Natural England have not objected to the development, nor has the Council's ecologist. In terms of green infrastructure and the reference to climate change, the officer report within the principal section includes reference to a very recent judicial review which referred to a development that considered climate change as an impact. How oil is used is set out within national energy statements. The downstream effects of oil, how consumers then use it, and how then it contributes to climate change has been considered within that judicial review, which has confirmed that it should not be the role of the planning authority or EIA assessments to consider downstream effects of the use of oil. The planning authority's role is to consider the land use effects of this development, and that judicial review confirms that downstream effects of using oil is not for the planning authority to consider in that decision-making process. What we've heard is members have considered the impacts to landscape character. Now that is a finely balanced issue, and officers have advised there will be harm, and that is an issue that's balanced up with economic benefits. And the role of the planning authority, of course, is to consider our advice, but if they don't agree with it, if something else tips the balance, a different decision could be made. And that potentially could be linked, obviously, to tourism, because the landscape quality of the Isle of Wight is related, is bound up, obviously, in why people come here. So that's effectively our assessment of those issues that you've raised and the risks that can be related to them.
Okay. Councillor Jarman, you wish to make a comment?
Yes. I think Councillor Price had his hand up before me, but I think he's busy. If it may assist, I'd been making some notes as we went through the meeting, and also prepared a proposal for refusal, which I think builds on what all three have built on so far. I've also prepared during the meeting some notes, which I've been furiously writing as well, which with your permission I'll leave with the officers to consider in their deliberations while we adjourn as you proposed.
Okay, Councillor Price, you wanted to come back, and I suggest that we have.
Just a point in terms of giving great weight. You can give great weight, and if you have an index and you give 100% of your index to the weight, and then you look at the benefit to the national economy of 2 days worth of oil supply, 2 days out of 20 years of 365 days, that is a tiny, tiny answer that you come up with. It's a 0.02 or something. So, you know, you can give it weight, but even so, giving it weight, then you dismiss it or reduce it and compare it to the weight of losing our tourism economy, which the island relies upon. So I think you can give it great weight without actually just giving it overwhelming weight.
Thank you. Councillor Price.
Thank you, Chairman. Sorry, it was only to say that I totally respect what the plan officer said in regards to the risk to water and the fact that we can't really include the fact that there is no defined local benefit. So, I mean, I think if those are the things that we shouldn't put in there, we shouldn't put them in there, subject to the other members.
Okay, yeah, I think that we can say that however temporary, it's not acceptable, and that there is a wider ranging impact of this development that can't be mitigated against, and that we should focus on the weight given to those and the rebalancing of that using the DM12 and DM13, because 202 from the MPPF does weigh up that harm benefit, as Susie, Councillor Ellis's speech said, and I think we need to focus on those bits. Thank you.
Councillor Brodie.
Yeah, sorry. I'm just a little concerned that we're entirely ruling out SP4, to be honest, because I see it as a balance in terms of the national economic benefit, but also against the local economic deficit that we would get as a result of this, in my view. And I think it should still be in there, albeit maybe not the first one or anything like that, but it should be part of the reasons why we're refusing. The difficulty we have here, Chair, of course, is that I don't think there's any doubt that this committee wishes to refuse this application. I don't think there's any doubt whatsoever. I don't know, but I'll be astonished if anybody votes for this application. So I hope we're not going to get into a trading session that I've seen in the past. I think you should adjourn this and let's try and build on what members have proposed and bring that back as soon as that's possible. But I don't want to get into what happened a few meetings ago where we got into some councillors on this committee trying to get things to refuse on, being knocked back all the time. I think that just looks ridiculous.
Totally in agreement with you, Councillor Brodie. I am now going to adjourn for 10 minutes. 10 minutes. You've got 10 minutes now to actually build on the fact that we are leaning towards refusal. Thank you.
So, Chairman, it's going to be myself and then Russell.
Okay.
That's all right.
Justice. Then Councillor Churchman, we have to then accept.
At the moment, we have one proposal for refusal for a number of reasons that have been added to which
They're going to have to accept. Yeah.
Councillor Brodie has seconded.
Yeah.
If that's going to change, we both need to accept
Yeah.
that.
We'll do. Okay. Mr. Bolter and Mr. Chick, can you report back the wording that you have got for a refusal?
Thank you, Chairman. Just before Mr. Chick reads out the proposed wording for the reason of refusal, I just wanted to come back to the committee and just effectively, I suppose, go back to Councillor Brodie's question earlier, which related to our views on the strength of the decision and our ability or otherwise to defend a decision in an appeal scenario. So I just want to highlight to members that we've been thinking very carefully about that question when digesting the discussion and the reasons that were discussed for refusal, in translating that into the reason that Mr. Chick will be reading out for you now. Thank you.
Mr. Chick.
Thank you. So the wording is the proposed development would cause significant harm to the landscape and visual qualities of the surrounding area and thereby compromise the island's tourism industry. The economic benefits of the proposed development would not outweigh the harm to the integrity of the landscape, contrary to policies SP4, SP5, DM2 and DM12 of the Island Plan Core Strategy.
Councillor Churchman, do you accept that wording?
It's sinking in. I think my only comment would be that at no time have the applicants produced any evidence to support their application, because the two previous drills that were done on that site, Arreton 1 and Arreton 2, produced nothing like enough. There was a mention of some oil, but it was so slight. So I'm not sure how you put this, but as I said, there was no evidence to support the application to drill in a place already drilled twice. Thank you.
Councillor Churchman, there hasn't been drilling on that site. Is that correct?
740 metres.
Yeah, so there have been historic boreholes which have drilled not at this site but into the same geological formation, and the second one did show reserves of oil.
Okay.
Can I just say something? As the person I think we're probably moving on to a different motion in some ways here. But I mean, I'm comfortable with what Mr. Chick read out, but there is no mention of defending our biosphere status. I'm not sure which one that's in, DM12 or trying to find it quickly. You had it, didn't you, Matt? It's in 12.
DM13 and
yeah, right. So it isn't DM12. Can we make an allusion to the biosphere status of the island within the proposal, Russell? Yeah. It's an international designation, so we want to defend it. Yeah. So if you can include that. Yeah, he's referred to SP5. Yeah. There's SP4, 5, 2, and 2. And 12, what's 2? Just bear with me, Chair, a second. I'm just trying to, because I'm sure Mr. Chick referred to DM2 as well, which, is that correct? Yeah. I'm just checking to see what DM2 is. I'm not as familiar with these things as I should be. But just really looking for DM2. I hate the yellow print in here because I can't see it. Oh yeah, design quality for new development. Can you explain that to us, Mr. Chick, please?
Yes, so policy DM2 is a little bit more of is a little wider than policy DM12, but it does remain relevant in that it says that development proposals will be expected, and I'll paraphrase this, to have regard to existing constraints such as adjacent buildings, topography, views, watercourses, hedges, trees, wildlife corridors, and the section that's important is other features which may significantly contribute to the character of the area.
So just in conclusion. In which case, I mean, I'm happy to still be Councillor Churchman's proposal. I would advise you to accept it, Councillor Churchman.
I was just going to say, Chair, if I may, that I'm quite happy with that wording, and I propose the refusal on that basis.
And I second.
Chick, sorry, Mr. Chick, can you read out the wording so that members are clear? Thank you.
Yes. So the proposed development would cause significant harm to the landscape and visual qualities of the surrounding area and thereby compromise the island's tourism industry. The economic benefits of the proposed development would not outweigh the harm to the integrity of lands. Sorry, I think I've missed a word there. The integrity of the island's landscape and biosphere status.
So I've got confirmation from the proposer, Councillor Churchman, and seconder, Councillor Brodie. I'm then going to now put this to the vote. Is it going to? I've got a request for a named vote. Okay. So it's a named vote. Those for the refusal.
Councillor Adams, Councillor Beston, Councillor Brodie, Councillor Churchman, Councillor Critchison, Councillor Drew, Councillor Jarman, Councillor Oliver, Councillor Price, Councillor Quirk and Councillor Lilly.
That's unanimous. The application is refused. We can go on to, is there any members' questions? Haven't received any. Don't seem to have those. Well then, actually close the meeting. Thank you.